The judge in the Bryan Kohberger matter admits the courts got it wrong. Bryan Kohberger's attorneys want the other two guys' DNA. A mass shooter pleads guilty. A man does the most appalling thing a husband could do to his wife. And then finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it. Good day, everyone. My name is Scott Reich, and this is CrimeTalk. Thanks for joining us. You know the drill. Subscribe if you haven't, like if you do, leave me a comment below, hit that little bell for notifications, and remember, you can listen to us anytime on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Hope you all had a great weekend. Let's get to the start of the docket, start of the week, June 26th, 2023. Let's go ahead and open the record. First, now, the Idaho judge denied a request from around 24 news organizations to lift the gag order in the case of the man accused of stabbing 4 college students to death. That's right, Bryan Kohberger. However, the gag order was significantly narrowed in response to the news organization's concerns, as well they should be. It was overly broad and in violation of the First Amendment. Interesting because, remember, the prosecutor said, well, it was basically the same protection order they had in the Lori Vallow Chad Daybell matter. Somebody took a look at it. And yes, in this particular case, it's narrowed. The counsel cannot go out and make statements about the case that are going to materially affect the outcome. So the order was filed Friday afternoon in Latah County. The district court judge said what is formally called a non-dissemination order, that any prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, any agents of the prosecuting attorneys and the defense attorneys, and any attorney representing a witness, victim, or a victim's family are prohibited from making extrajudicial statements that the lawyer agent knows or reasonably should know will have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing or otherwise influence the outcome of the case. Well, the judge said to preserve the right to a fair trial, some curtailment of the dissemination of the information in this case is necessary and authorized under the law. He did note that the original gag order, which also barred law enforcement officers and others tangentially related to the case from speaking to the press, was arguably overbroad and vague in some areas. Arguably? No, it was, and that's why the court changed their mind, because, at least in this case, the news media actually challenged it, and they were going to take the matter up to the Idaho Supreme Court if the court did not basically make the order comply with the ethical obligations that the attorneys have in every given case. So the judge noted that the revised order is narrowly drawn to prohibit only extrajudicial statements that have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing this case, including specific examples of what speech is prohibited and what is allowed. Now, the judge also denied attorney Shannon Gray's request to be exempted from the amended order. Gray represents the family of victim Kaylee Gonsalves, and Gray had asked to be excluded from the order so that he could talk to the press on the family's behalf. Well, the judge noted that as an attorney, Gray could have access to confidential information about the case that would be prejudicial if it was ultimately released to the public. Mr. Gray has accused the prosecution of keeping the family in the dark, which is why he says, "Are you kidding me?" We'll see. At least they got it correct. So what this really means is we should start seeing more sources from the police department that couldn't speak on the record, but hopefully we'll be finding out more and more information about the case. Now, for those who don't recall, obviously Kohberger is charged with the 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in connection with the stabbing deaths in Moscow, Idaho. And the judge noted that he is potentially facing the death penalty if found guilty. Well, in other news, we explained to you last week how the FBI, the Idaho labs and things of that nature, were able to trace through family genealogy back to Bryan Kohberger the DNA that was found at the scene. Well, Bryan Kohberger's attorneys have filed a response, and they claim that the DNA evidence from 2 other men was found at the scene of the brutal killing of the 4 college students. And in their pleadings filed Thursday, the attorneys said there was no connection between the 28-year-old Kohberger and the students fatally stabbed in their campus housing there in Moscow, Idaho. There is no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims, read the filing by attorney Jay Logsdon. In their pleadings, they specifically stated there is no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. They go on to note that there is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, office, home, or vehicle. And the filing states that by December 17th, 2022, lab analysts were aware of 2 additional male DNA suspects within the house where the deceased were located. The defense team stated a second male's DNA was found inside the Moscow home and that the police allegedly found DNA from a third man on a glove discovered outside of the residence. To this date, the defense is unaware of what sort of testing, if any, was conducted on these samples other than the STR DNA profiles. The filings, an objection to the state's motion for a protective order, argues that the defense team should have access to all of the data and investigative genetic genealogy that led prosecutors to claim that Kohberger's DNA collected with a buccal swab was statistically matched to the DNA found on a knife sheath discovered at the scene. That's right, on the little button there. So last week, prosecutors claimed DNA found on the knife sheath left at the Idaho murder scene is a statistical match to a cheek swab taken from the suspect. The FBI said they used databases in publicly held DNA sites similar to 23andMe. Prosecutors argued that Kohberger had no right to the FBI data uncovered from the method. Now, in the filings, the defense team said, perhaps unsurprisingly, Mr. Kohberger does not accept that his defense does not need this information. Of course, the defense is going to be entitled to what steps the FBI used in creating this DNA information because it is the basis of the challenge in this particular case. I'm pretty confident the defense is going to get it. The attorneys for Kohberger also state that apparently the state only wants to prevent Mr. Kohberger from seeing how the investigative genetic genealogy profile was created and how many other people the FBI chose to ignore during their investigation. Now, the filing accused the government of failing to release the information because somehow people will stop sharing their genetics if they were to realize the government is watching. I mean, we've already told you that already. Why would you do that? Anyway, detectives found a K-bar knife sheath on the bed with the bodies of Mogen and Gonsalves. The sheath was partially under Mogen's body and the comforter on the bed, according to court filings. There is currently a little under a month left for the prosecution to decide whether they will pursue the death penalty in this case. And there's been some reports that the prosecutors have met with the victims' families to discuss the issue of death, specifically with Kernodle's mother and Kara Northington. They favor prison for life for Kohberger if he's convicted. Her father, Jeff, on the other hand, is reportedly in favor of the death penalty for the alleged killings. The Gonsalves and the Mogens are in favor of the death penalty, and the Chapins have not made their position known to the public. So lots going on. Who knows? Maybe that's not going to be enough. Alternate suspects potentially being developed goes to the adequacy of the police investigation. Were they looking at all evidence and letting the chips fall where they may, or did they focus on one particular person, put their blinders on, and ignoring other individuals that could be suspects? Maybe there's a completely plausible explanation that the other possible suspects were completely cleared. My guess, though, is they weren't. Next on the docket, a mass murderer pleads guilty. Anderson Aldrich pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, and he also pled no contest to 2 counts of bias-motivated crimes on a felony and another of a misdemeanor. What does no contest mean? It's a guilty plea, but he's kind of saying, I'm not saying I did, I'm not saying I didn't, but please accept my guilty plea. Now, Aldrich, who is non-binary and uses they and them pronouns, now faces life in prison on these murder charges because Colorado no longer has the death penalty. And for those who don't recall, on November 19th in 2022, Anderson Aldrich, wearing body armor, opened fire at Club Q, an LGBTQ nightclub. Apart from those killed, nearly 24 others were wounded by gunfire and otherwise injured before being stopped by heroic patrons. Those killed in the shootings were identified as Kelly Loving, Daniel Aston, Derek Rump, Ashley Paw, and Raymond Green Vance. At least this case is now over, and it just shows you get life in prison for one murder, and you get life in prison for 5. Just something to think about, ladies and gentlemen. Just something to think about. Next, this man did the worst thing he could possibly do to his wife. Listen to this story. This is appalling. So a French man has been accused of drugging his wife and recording at least 51 men raping her while she slept in attacks between 2011 and 2020. Now, Dominic P., a pensioner who had been married for more than 50 years, allegedly mixed anti-anxiety drug lorazepam into his wife's evening meal. He would then invite his guests into their house so that they could rape his wife while she was sleeping. A total of 51 men between the ages of 26 and 73 have been identified, arrested, and charged with rape following an inquiry that was launched back in 2020 in the southern city of Avignon. The suspect from nearby Mazan reportedly found the men on a Sun Insu, a French internet forum where members discuss performing sexual acts on women without their consent, and often when they are drugged. That is the definition of rape. Anyway, the exchanges on the web forum were erased after being linked to a criminal investigation into a pedophile, racist, or anti-Semitic content and the sale of illicit substances. The husband banned tobacco and perfume of the participants to avoid strong smells that could potentially wake his wife. The men were asked to wash their hands in warm water to avoid a sudden temperature change, and were made to undress in the kitchen to avoid leaving clothes in the bedroom. The guests had to park near a school and walk in the dark to the house to avoid raising neighbors' suspicions. Some claimed they had no idea that the wife had not consented to the sexual acts, while one person denied it was rape, saying, "It's his wife. He does what he likes with her." What century are we living in? Well, according to prosecutors, the suspect insisted that none of the men who came to the house gave up going through with the sexual acts with his wife given her state. He never used violence or threats against anyone, so that would be committed. Each individual was in possession of his free will to stop these acts and leave, the prosecutor said. When the woman was asked to talk about her husband in November of 2020 during the initial investigation, she described him as a great guy and kind and very caring. She said that he tried to get her to agree to partner swapping, but she refused as she didn't like to be touched without having feelings for someone. When the police informed her of the tapes, she reportedly began piecing together the past. The woman said she had flashbacks and that drugging could have been the reason behind her frequent fatigue and absent-mindedness. Now, the medical examinations found she had been infected with 4 sexually transmitted diseases. If the investigation goes forward, the magistrate following the prosecutor's indictment, a historic trial is expected to take place early next year with 52 defendants in the same box uncharged. Now, thank goodness this woman has filed for divorce, and that is unbelievable. Just like parents have a duty to protect their children, the husband has a duty to protect his wife and not victimize them. Unbelievable. Please go to crimetalksearch.com, sign up for a background subscription service. You'll be happy you did. If there's anyone out there you were ever curious about what was in their background, now is the time to do it. If you're going to get involved with somebody, now is the time to do it. When you go to crimetalksearch.com, you put in the name, literally millions of public records are searched, and a report is generated. And it's going to give you a report. If they have multiple social media accounts, you're going to find it. If they have multiple phone numbers, multiple email addresses, it's going to be found. And more importantly, you're going to get information regarding criminal history. Hopefully the person you're searching has none whatsoever. But if it's there, it's going to be found. You're going to get everything you'd want to know, whether you're going into business or whether you're going into a personal relationship. You're going to be able to find out the information you want to know. So go to crimetalksearch.com, sign up today. You'll be happy you did. And finally today, our dumb criminal of the day. A convicted sex offender is facing a charge for video voyeurism after he was flying a drone to, take a look into the bathroom window of a female neighbor. Like, who doesn't do that, right? Yeah, no, that's wrong. So investigators say that Stephanie Marola was preparing to take a shower in her residence the other evening when she heard a buzzing sound outside her window. And when Miss Marola went outside to investigate, she spotted a drone hovering near the window. As she approached the drone, it began to fly away, but got stuck on a tree branch and fell to the ground. Marola then grabbed the drone and dunked it in her pool, disabling the drone. Now, Marola, who lives with his 3-year-old daughter, called 911 and reported the remote peeping Tom attempt. A subsequent investigation resulted in the arrest of Christopher Jones, whose home, where he lives with his 72-year-old mother, abuts Marola's property. Now, while the police did not reveal how the defendant was linked to the drone, they say that Jones admitted he was, in fact, the operator. Needless to say, he's been arraigned on felony video voyeurism charges and released from custody. A registered sex offender and a grown man living with his 72-year-old mother, yeah, that doesn't send off red flags anywhere, does it, ladies and gentlemen? Of course it does, yes. And guess what, Mr. Jones? When you sign up to fly that drone, you have to put in all your identifying information. And through GPS, they can track exactly where that drone goes. You, sir, are our dumb criminal of the day. And that's one step above just creeper. All right, Mr. Jones, you're a creeper. Probably why you're a sex offender. Just saying. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk.